Thank you, Your Honor. Your Honor, members, counsel, members of the jury, thank you for this opportunity, and thank you so much for your patience in this case, allowing us to be here today and finally argue our take on the facts and circumstances of what you've heard over the last several days. I want to start with a task that I think we're all inadequate for, and that is I think we have to begin by trying to talk about the unspeakable loss here of young Kaylie Juga. In this case, we know from her friend Jennifer that Kaylie was outgoing, that she was brave, that she was gentle, that she was smart. And we know from hearing and talking about her through others' eyes that at the age we lost her, the world was really waiting for her. We know because we saw Jennifer DeZoma, she'd be a senior. In this chaotic school year that has just happened, she would have suffered through that with all others. She'd be about to graduate. She'd be in that spectacular set of moments where she thinks about jobs and colleges. It was all just about to happen. She was at the very start of those beginning adult chapters of your life. At 15, where you think you know everything and don't know a thing, where adulthood looks so clear and yet it is so confusing. She was there. And like the early part of so many of our life stories, you know, she met somebody, right? She met a boy. And sometimes that's the brilliant beginning of life stories. For her, it was the end. For Kaylie Juga, that was the end. Because this defendant took her love and affection, took her bravery and gentleness, and he deliberately and he violently made it so she could never move on. She missed that opportunity, members of the jury, that is so profound, that second relationship in your life. That relationship where you understand, okay, the world has choices, and it's not all or nothing, and the world has all sorts of shades of love and life experience. She never got it, because it was all he could do to make sure she would never, ever get there. That second chapter and story was going to be denied her. So I'm going to talk about the evidence in some detail. And you guys have heard it, so you will not hear new information. You'll hear the information we've talked about for several days. And I'm going to ask you to think about it with a few different sort of ways to organize it, ways to process what I will be talking about and you have heard. I'm going to ask you to think about this defendant and make some judgments about whether he is a person, one of those people who says, no rules really apply to me. Whether all that you hear and see show he is a person who says, I will not be defined by any of these rules. I ask you also to think about whether he is a person who has a profound ability and degree within him to manipulate others to his purposes. Is he that individual who again and again will use people? Think about all the people who he potentially got in very, very serious circumstances by asking them innocently, without giving them anything but the most selective information for their sympathy and their kindness, and in taking advantage of that, he achieved her death. And then, you know, we have talked from voir dire through witnesses about domestic violence. And I ask you as jurors to think about this case, though the individuals here are young, within that prism, within that definition of the things we know about domestic violence. Because I'm going to submit to you in this case that the time together between Kaylie Juga and this defendant was defined by domestic violence. And the time apart was the tragic, horrific end of the worst of domestic violence relationships, and that was her violent murder. So as I talk about this case, I'm going to talk about domestic violence and how that defines what happens. I'm going to talk about how a person, the defendant, said, no rule will ever stop me from my obsessions, from my absolute insistence that I have control in this situation. And that no one was someone he didn't feel he could manipulate to his purposes. That end purpose being the death of Kaylie Juga. Because Kaylie Juga was controlled by this defendant, and then he was hurt by this defendant. Kaylie Juga was stalked by this defendant, and then Kaylie Juga was murdered by this defendant. And the Juga family here today is left broken. They're left broken in a house where you can't take a shower alone without that horrific, nightmarish reminder, and where the garage is never, ever going to be safe. They are broken. So this domestic violence relationship has its beginnings in 2018, and the defendant was again and again welcomed into the Juga home. He's there for movie nights. There's the kind of rules that parents have, where you can't have the door closed, and one of you has to be on the floor, one of you on the bed. There are holidays spent together. They fed him numerous times. They spent numerous evenings with this defendant. Their generosity as a family caused him to know the rooms and the security cameras and the windows that allowed him the information that broke them. And of course there was teen love, but there was also controlling behavior. You heard Stephanie Juga say, there came a point where there were just way too many calls. I couldn't be in the car with my daughter without her endlessly having recalls from him. I had to actually tell him myself, hey, this is a time when she's with me, you need to cut it out. And he would blow it off, but this behavior continued. She would be in her room, and she would always have to have him on the video. They weren't even speaking, but he would always have to be monitoring her activities in her room. So the controlling behavior was even then going on. And by the sophomore year, as this relationship got to its second stage, second part, by sophomore year, you have her friends say, I witnessed in the comments an argument where I saw my friend Kaylie have her ear yanked by the defendant, yanked so she went to the ground. So not just a pull, not a joke, hard enough that a teenage girl cannot keep on her feet and goes all the way to the ground. not controlled by a public place, not worried about detection or being caught. None of those things matter because my control is all that I will be concerned about. I know no limits. My control will not be impacted by the fact I could be seen or disciplined. None of that matters. She will do what I want. And I will hurt her to make that happen. Now, you might say, okay, this is another teenager. You know, what if she has drama in her? What if she, you know, misinterpreted? What if just out of friendship she's, you know, said something that, you know, should we as a jury just adopt what one teenager says and believe it defines what I'm being asked to do today? But you don't have to worry about that, do you? Because you know on January 17th, 2019, less than 4 months before Kaylie Juga is murdered in her home, this defendant is not just witnessed by another teenager, he's witnessed by multiple teachers and an assistant principal. So let's talk about January 17th and whether we know this is a violent, disturbing domestic violence relationship where now, in retrospect, we can see how we got to that horrible day. January 17th, argument. Kaylie Juga, just trying to figure out some boundaries, trying to figure out as the victim in these things, what is it that I can do to keep myself safe or in some way take the pressure off me. She asks a teacher to intervene. Not easy for a teenager. She asks the teacher, separate us, please. The defendant will have none of that. You teachers, you don't control me. I'm in my control zone here. You teachers you don't impact me at all. You authority figures, you don't get to decide anything for me. The teacher tries to get him to leave, he won't. All he wants to do is move him to another location in the class. No, that won't be happening. He calls security. Still, knowing security is coming. Absolutely not. I'm in control here. Security are not going to stop me. This is my control zone. Security gets there. They're insistent. That doesn't work. Now, the school police officer has to be called. And now the vice principal is interested. Okay, I got 2 teachers in that room. This is a classroom with 2 teachers. I got security personnel. And they feel they need to bring a cop in, something must be out of hand. January 17th. The 2 teachers, you heard Mr. Anglin say, I and the other teacher physically tried to get between the defendant and Kaylie. This is an actual physical barrier of adult authority figures. Here is a wonderful snapshot to figure out if we have a defendant who is in any way under control on the issues that we worry about. What does he do? He shoves through teachers because he will be in control in the presence of security. And when he gets to Kaylie, with those teachers present, he is bending her hand. She is crying because he must have her phone. Not his phone, her phone. He has to have her phone. And so I will go through any number of teachers and I will harm her to make sure this is done. Because I am in control. The vice principal gets there. Her immediate instinct is to go to a person who clearly is a victim in this situation. The phone is not recovered until the security cop says there will be consequences, meaning the possibility of some crime. That's what happens when a cop tells you that, unless you give it back. And only then does he fling it. Only then. He's escorted out. School officials try to go different routes to keep people separate, and they accidentally end up in the same area. Here's what you were told by the assistant principal at Bradford. This is the person who supervises the deans. What she does all day is school discipline. So we're not talking about an amateur here. She says the two of them end up in the same hallway. There are still law enforcement, school security, a teacher who's coming to do a report, and the vice principal. I'm not sure you couldn't gather in short notice more authority figures in a school at any split second. When the defendant sees Kaylie again, with all those people who should have any rational, under control person understanding, okay, I was out of hand a second ago, I got to get myself together here. I got to be cooperative now, because it's just not acceptable or normal behavior to again lose it. In that hallway, no teenager tells you this, the assistant principal at Bradford tells you that not only did the police officer warn Martice Fuller, the defendant, don't touch her, don't have any contact with her, but the vice principal says she also told the defendant not to go at her, not to make any new contact with her. Is the defendant in any way under control? Or is his absolute requirement that he control Kaylie Juga so defining of him that he will defy everybody that I just mentioned? Well, we know the answer, because he made it through those people and grabbed her backpack, having just been warned not to do that, and said, "You're going to do me that way." This is a young man at that time, this defendant, who has shown us again that he is willing and capable to be dangerous in front of witnesses with consequences coming. None of that matters as long as he gets to be in control. Just as that domestic violence mentality tells us is the absolute necessity and requirement of an individual who is an abuser in those situations. So again, he has to be physically separated. And the assistant principal, who does school discipline all day, is really alarmed. When you alarm a person like Jill Swenson, you're saying something. You are somewhere high on the scales. She called it an extreme case. That's what she told you under oath in testimony. So then, now that incident, in terms of the moment of it, is over. And Jill Swenson, the assistant principal, is thinking, how can I give Kaylie some respite and still allow everybody to still, coexist here at my big high school? And one of the things that Kaylie told her, and this is another way control is asserted in a domestic violence relationship, right? She says, I would like to break up with the defendant. This is Kaylie telling Jill Swenson. But he tells me he will harm himself, and I don't want that to happen to him. So this threat that if you try to take away my control, if you break up with me, I will harm myself. Of course, that's another control mechanism, right? That's saying it will be on you. You know, it's guilting somebody into staying in a relationship with you, another vehicle of control. And it helps define why Kaylie Juga has the impossible choices she has at each moment in this case before she dies. So one of the things that the assistant principal says is, you know what, I'm going to get these people, I'm going to change their classes, all right? I assume that's, you know, that's handbook of school discipline #1, right? You got two people with a conflict, you switch their schedules. I assume that's #1 in the playbook. It sent the defendant, who was, I believe, serving a suspension, into high volume. You heard the assistant principal, he called every office at the school looking for me. I mean, who does that when they want to talk to the assistant principal? Who won't just leave a message? Who feels they must call every office in a school where a school official says, here's what the guy was doing? It was so insistent, there were so many calls, that she, who was at a district meeting in another building, was called by her secretary or somebody working as a, you know, doing the phones, saying, hey, would you call him? We can't take this anymore here at the building. So she actually leaves a meeting and calls the defendant back. This is a student, because he will not let anyone rest at Bradford because he's about to lose control. And no limits apply to him. Who would make more than one call and just wait and sit? If you had something to say to an assistant principal, who does this? And so she calls him, and what did she tell you about that phone call? He was trying to persuade her. She was telling him, no, this is going to happen. He would not stop. The assistant principal had to hang up on him. He knows no limits. No authority is going to stop him. And now, again, a glimpse of who we're dealing with. There is the meeting that his mother attends with him at Jill Schwenson's office. And this is a meeting to talk about what Jill Schwenson has come to, which is, hey, we're going to have an agreement that allows the defendant to continue his priorities, staying at school, playing football, as long as he does something very simple. He stays away from this person who Jill Schwenson believed was in danger. And what did Jill Schwenson, an experienced person who does this every day, what did she tell you? She told you that this was an extreme case of anger. She said, the defendant called me a liar when I reported to him what I myself had seen. I mean, talking about the interaction in the hallway. The defendant is going to tell the assistant dean, when she says, here's what I saw, you're lying. He put his finger in my face. The student put the head disciplinary officer at Bradford, he put his finger in her face. She said, based on that interaction, I personally was scared. He has frightened a person who does school discipline all day. The assistant principal is frightened about what anger he shows her sometime after January 17th about the rules or anybody making rules about him and Kaylie Juga. no limits, no control. So, you know, you would think this abeyance agreement is the perfect test, right? Because we assume that the defendant has prioritized, I want to stay in school, I want to play football. So here is our ability to monitor whether he understands that there are rules that apply to him and whether he can follow them. And it only lasts a few weeks. It only, you know, we know the answer to whether he feels any rules apply to him in regards to Kaylie Juga in just a few weeks. All he's supposed to do, I mean, evidently he's allowed to see her out of school, okay, because she is minimized for a variety of reasons, we assume, and he is minimized, and so he's being allowed. So it's just about the school day. And yet what happens is, in late February, he corners her at a locker, he grabs her. This is after they have already broken up. It's evidently on video. The school people get a chance to see it. And he, showing he cannot be in compliance, the defendant is now out. Because they have to do what they can to protect Kaylie Juga. Because there's been another time where he showed the rules don't apply to him, and he will do physically whatever he needs to do to get control. And, you know, Kaylie Juga agonized. You could tell that from Stephanie DeZoma and then from her mom's testimony about whether to tell the school about that incident. She agonized, and one of the things she discussed was, you know, isn't this just going to make it matter? You know, if I try to give him consequences or try to draw a line here, you know, essentially the idea is, aren't I in any even more danger? And this is the nightmarish scenario for someone who is a victim in the midst of this type of situation, right? Because if they're going to try to get consequences, if they're going to call somebody on the things they think are dangerous, they have to worry that they'll ramp up the anger. And so they'll be in even more danger. And so, you know, our general and our generic advice, if you and I heard somebody say this, we'd say, yeah, please go tell the authorities, right? But would we be expecting, or would we be preparing for those individuals who are so obsessed with control in a relationship that their ramped up anger will actually be potentially fatal? Because that is what we have with this defendant here today. That's the consequences of the ramped up anger. Because right after that happened, the conversation with the people who we have heard from in this case is Kaylie ruined his life, that Martin Torres said that. Martin Torres said, this is a close friend of his for years. He said he wanted to kill her. Austin Hernandez, yes, he said, he blamed her for things. He said that she was responsible and had ruined his life. And from there, from March 1st on, there's the contrast of both of these people's behaviors. Because the pattern of behavior is Kaylie Juga thinking of every strategy she can think of to try to get safe. And in contrast, the defendant spends the next 2 months preparing to hunt and kill Kaylie Juga. What did Kaylie do? Kaylie changed her work. She actually got a different job. It was a heartbreaking letter she sends to Martino's. I mean, for a girl of this age to have to say, thank you so much for my first work opportunity, I don't feel safe. She had the number blocked. This is an open place of business. She got them to agree to keep the doors locked so that customers would have to knock to get in. I mean, they had to change their way they do business to try to keep her safe. She would no longer go anywhere alone. Imagine a 15-year-old. Her life, she's now sentenced because of this ex-relationship. She can't go anywhere alone. She can't, and this is probably the one that I don't understand, but that someone of a different age would, she cannot go someplace with friends and let anybody post or acknowledge where they are. You can't do the selfie that shows the sign on, that you're at Great America, et cetera, et cetera. You can't have that life, is what she thought. She joked with people, probably because of the defense mechanism for a human being trying to live every day. She joked with her friends, he's gonna kill me. She tried to make it something that could be funny so she could live every day. So she took those steps to try to still be a person living a life and be safe. During those same months, what is the defendant doing? The defendant is getting one guy to give him ammunition for a gun. He is asking someone else to take a picture of him proudly posed with the gun he has obtained. He sends that out to people. Here's my gun. When people see him, he shows them the gun. Would you like to hold it? He takes a bike from the Bowen's household and he stashes it at Ezra Stargell's house, which has the advantage of being a great staging point for your murder, because it is directly across the street from the subdivision. So you have a great staging point for whatever is going to come next. He's at Desiree's, where not once, not twice, but 3 times in either communications by media or in person, he says to her, I'm going to kill Kaylie, and he tries to recruit her to help. Desiree, who says he's in a dark jogging suit, the dark jogging suit that he has with him on May 6th, but somehow we can't find now. He's then at Alexis Furtney's. Alexis Furtney, who is perhaps the perfect person to manipulate. She's the type of person who, if you stay at her house a couple nights, she has crutches and she will still go buy you McDonald's for breakfast because you like pancakes. And so she'll still go do that. And heck, she'll give you a ride wherever you want to go. And in fact, if you blow her off in the mid-afternoon, if you make her come all the way across town to pick you up, and she's literally, almost pathetically, going from parking lot to parking lot thinking maybe he'll be here, and then she drives home, if you contact her again, guess what? She'll drive all the way across town to get you again. So you're with Alexis Furtney, and Lexi, trying to figure out how to stay safe and thinking Lexi Furtney is a friend of hers, is mad because he's at Lexi Furtney's. Here he is again, entangling himself with her life in a way that feels to her like, how am I ever going to get out from under this? And Lexi Furtney and the defendant talk about that when he wakes up in the morning on the 9th. Before noon on the 9th, he's back with Desiree saying, you need to do that to her. I'm so mad. And then the plan is hatched. Then it's the day that this is going to happen. Because he says, drop me at Ezra's. We know they leave at 12:40. We see that on video as they're walking out of the house. We know from 107 to 112, they're at Stein's. Okay, we know that Alexi drops the defendant at Ezra's. Few minutes later, as she's doing her stuff, he says, "Pick me up in an hour," which conveniently is at 2:40 p.m., which conveniently will be after he knows that that Kaylie and her mom will be home from school. They get home, remember, typically around 2:20, so it'd be a perfect time for him to be picked up again at Ezra's. He gets over to Ezra's. It's sometime around 2, just before 2. He says to Ezra, just before 2, around then, "I'm going to go to my grandma's." Ezra sees him leave on a bike. Ezra's looking out a window, sees him leave on a bike. Just after 2, just into the subdivision, so just literally across the street and a few houses on a bike, seconds after he's left on that bike, we see the defendant riding. We're going to talk about the clothes in a while. And he's headed towards the park. And if he goes on, it'll be towards Kaylie's house. At 2:20, Kaylie and Stephanie return home. And I think we know from the testimony that Kaylie's last good memories are music and dancing and teasing with her mom. And so if we have anything to smile about in this case, it's that those last moments had some joy. Lexi shows up right on time. She is the perfect person to manipulate. At 2:40, she's at Ezra's house, no sign of the defendant. She makes it basically back home before the defendant gets in touch with her, and now he wants to ride right away. And she says, "Listen, I got to switch cars. I'm driving my mom's car. I got to switch, so I got to get the rest of the way home." And he then begins to call other people for rides. Why? Because if you're over by Ezra's house, as we know from Cole Ballard, the sirens are going nonstop. It's clear that law enforcement who were called at 3:02 are all over the area now. And so this is an individual desperate. The defendant is desperate to be removed from this location. But the only person who will answer him is Lexi, right? So she drives back, she picks him up. It's sometime after that. At 2:56, 52, he's at the driveway of the Juga home. He's in all black, but with those same white shoes, he's in all black. It's more than a minute before you hear any shots. So when he walked in, did he try to get a feel for who was there? He knew the cars, but did he try to just make sure? Did he head up? Did he savor the moment? Did he have any moments of regret and then got up the courage, bolstered himself to do what would get him back in control? We don't know. We know a little more than a minute later, he shoots 7 times. We know that after just 3 minutes and a few seconds, he runs out He runs out on foot the same direction he came, which is back towards that park, ultimately back towards that doorbell camera that sees him at 3:03, back in a different change of clothes, headed back towards Ezra Stargell's house on that same bike. And Stephanie Juga talks about how she's in her bathroom, which you saw from the diagrams is a couple of doors away from her daughter's room. Think about closed doors and a hair dry, hair care blowers going, those kind of things. But at some point, she hears the sound that gets through to a mother. Shots can be all sorts of things, guys. Shots can be anything from a firecracker to a car backfire to somebody slamming something in a neighbor's yard. But if you hear your daughter scream, that pierces the doors. Your daughter's scream is not something you have to sort in your brain subconsciously ignores. So probably after several shots or multiple shots, that scream pierces her. And she heads out and she hears more shots and one more scream. Now, Kaylie is shot 5 times. And you heard the medical examiner say if there had been a team of surgeons at this location, they could not have saved her. But I do want to talk for a moment about the circumstances of her wounds so that we're clear about questions of murder. You heard that and saw that there were gunpowder that had burned her arm. You also heard that Stephanie, one of her shots goes through an arm and then into her chest. And I want you to think about that moment when you would see or first realize that a person who you have been fearing for months has a gun and it's pointed at you. And I want you to consider whether just as Stephanie almost certainly got an arm up and had a bullet go through her arm and into her chest, whether the very beginnings of that same type of action would be what happened to Kaylie as well. Did Kaylie begin somehow to try to get her arm in the way so that her arm was closer to the gun and so took the gunpowder? But we know the bullets went into her chest. And I'd submit to you that it is logical for you to believe those chest bullets, probably almost all of them, occur first. Why do I say that? Because there is one shot to the head. If you remember, on her head, there is also a black mark which appears to be gunpowder burn. So again, that gun is close enough to her head where it burns her skin. It's not just the shot, it's the burning of the gunpowder on her skin. The bullet through her head goes through. It's a through and through shot. There's an entry and an exit wound. And there is a bullet right where her body is, right where she lays, that goes into the floor. So I'd suggest to you the last shot in this case was the defendant. That shot is directly above, shooting Kaylie Juga on the ground and shooting her defenseless and shooting her such that the bullet can go through both parts of her head and into the floor. And I'd submit to you that when you think about the question of intent in this case, you stop there. I'd suggest your work is done when you consider that wound and how that is really the reasonable explanation for the powder burn, wound to her head, and bullet in the floorboard, meaning it would have to be shot down. And Stephanie gets there, and you heard the 911 tape. And so you know that if there was any consciousness left, when the officer gets there, he says he feels some sort of pulse, but if there's any consciousness left, you know the woman who brought Kaylie Juga into this world did everything she could to bring her back. You heard that. And it could not be done. Even a mother's love could not do it. Because the defendant had acted on his plan and he had done his work. So, in the end, this case finally comes down to what is reasonable. In the end, this case is really about what is all the evidence you have heard, and is there any possibility that this evidence could all be combined so that it would have to be faced at jury trial by some man who was innocent and falsely accused? Now, let me be very clear here. The defense has no burden of proof whatsoever. So I do not mean to make an argument to you today that says they have to prove anything, because that is absolutely not the case. But I'd suggest to you that one of the ways you may look at the evidence is to say, okay, could an innocent person have all of these things happen to them that seem to indicate guilt? And I'd submit to you, in the end, when you consider them all, there's no way an innocent party, a person falsely accused, could have all these things happen. So I'm going to go through those with you, and then I'm going to conclude. So first, on May 9th, Kaylie Juga is killed by someone at 3 p.m. Okay, now remember, this is a scenario where we're considering the defendant might be innocent and falsely accused. At 3 p.m., Kaylie Juga is killed at her home. Okay, and here's a horrible circumstance. If you're innocent, well, yeah, you know her, right? But, you know, a lot of people knew her, so that doesn't say anything immediate. But her mom, Stephanie, is also shot. Okay? So if you're innocent, this is something that should immediately clear you, because you know this family. You've been with this family many times over the last year, and so if you are innocent and falsely accused, the fact that Stephanie survived should be the greatest thing that ever happened, because now you will be cleared. But instead, here's the horrible circumstance. If you're innocent, Stephanie Juga on 911 is already saying, the person who shot me is the defendant. And not only that, she continues to say it and has said it here in the courtroom. And here's how horrible this is. Here's how unlucky you are if you are falsely accused. This is not a identity from a distance. This is not her having to check and see somebody who shot at them with a sniper rifle. This is someone who she saw face to face in her house and had a conversation with. So this is not a split second where you'd have no opportunity, it's at a distance, maybe I saw them, maybe not. This is an identification of someone who knows you, where they had plenty of time and close proximity to make the identification. What a horrible set of circumstances if you're innocent, that Stephanie Juga would be that profoundly mistaken, or would choose to frame you and what? Let the real killer go free? Let the person who really killed her daughter go free because she wants to frame you instead? Those are the kind of things you'd have to believe for this to be reasonable, for the defendant to be innocent and it to be reasonable. And now here's a horrible circumstance if you're innocent. You have a motive. You're broken up and you've been expressing anger about that for months with all sorts of people. So of the people that we could find who might have some ill will towards Stephanie, you're the top of the list. A horrible circumstance. It certainly would make you a suspect, and a horrible circumstance if you are completely innocent. Here's also a horrible circumstance if you're innocent. There are people who are saying prior times you've been violent to her. She's told her friend he punched me in the face. Her friend has witnessed you dragging her down by the ear. There are teachers and staff who saw you bend her hand and make her cry and go at her even when they tried to stop it. So you have a history of all sorts of witnesses who have seen you do violence to her and accept no rules or controls. What a horrible set of circumstances if you're innocent that you have that track record with the very same girl who was killed randomly on May 9th. It's a rough set of circumstances for you to be an innocent person. But here's another horrible circumstance if you're innocent. There's been prior concerns that the family can even tell us about, and that some of your friends and her friends can tell us about, of you lurking around their house. Remember, the murder happens at the house, right? So who do we have track record of being at the house inappropriately at times they shouldn't when they've been told not to? Oh my goodness, one person, the defendant. So again, this one girl is randomly murdered, and you're the one who multiple people can document have lurked at her house inappropriately before. A horrible circumstance, horrible, unlucky if you are an innocent person. And then this murder is committed with a gun, right? So, again, you're 15, that seems like that would clear you. But a horrible circumstance. There's all sorts of people who say, during this same time period, you've been trying to get a gun. Well, that's unlucky, right? If you're innocent, you're trying to get a gun at the same time she's murdered with a gun. And here's how horrible that luck gets, okay? Because when we recover a gun, the gun looks like the same gun that you had. Because we start hearing from people who took a picture of you with the gun, who when they're showed the gun, they say, yeah, that looks like the same gun. So it appears that by some horrible circumstance, if you're innocent and falsely accused, you have the same type of gun. A gun that looks the same as the gun that is the gun that kills Kaylie Juga. What a horrible coincidence if you're an innocent person. And then, here's a horrible coincidence. It's a cousin of yours who takes the police, who otherwise are never going to find this gun, to a sewer in Racine where they find the very gun that is the murder weapon. Okay, so you didn't kill her, but your cousin is able to lead police to the murder weapon, which looks identical to a picture we have of you with the same gun and to what your friend says is the gun you showed him just days before the murder. But why, if you're innocent, would your cousin be able to bring us to the gun? And why would the gun be located very close in proximity to where you are arrested, to by Aunt Shanice's house? That's a horrible coincidence. And in fact, it's even wrapped in a diaper that is an identical size and brand of diaper to the diapers located at Tina Heron's house, which is the first place that you were taking shelter in Racine. So literally, not only is the gun found in the same place near where you are, not only is it shown to us by your cousin, but it literally it is wrapped in a diaper by the place you were first when you got to Racine. This is a horrible set of combined bad luck for an innocent person who is falsely accused. And not only that, but this cousin who finds the gun for the police in a place they would never have otherwise found it, in a sewer where the grate is on there, right? But when we look at your Facebook records, you, this innocent person, that's exactly the person you were contacting right after the murder to come and help you. So, you're innocent. The same guy you've been in touch with immediately to come and help you brings us to the gun. And here's how unlucky you are. Eventually, when your cousin does tell us where the gun is, he also offers to us a gun we would never find otherwise. He says, yes, I was handed this gun by the defendant and asked to get rid of it, and I'm the one who threw it in the sewer. So, let's say you were the cousin and you were just trying to get responsibility off yourself. Would you ever admit you were the one who threw it in there? Never. Why would you ever say, I'm the one who threw it in there? Because finally you decided to tell the truth. Just like taking us to a place we would have never found it is showing us you're telling us the truth. And at those moments, those final truth-telling moments, here's how unlucky you are. That's when it's very clear that your cousin, your own cousin, is saying, you, the defendant, are the one who gave us the gun, are the one who gave me the gun, which is the murder weapon. How could this happen to an innocent guy? Why would, while I am showing you a gun you would never find, why would I say, you know what? Randomly, I'm going to show you a gun you would never find, and I'm going to frame my cousin. I'm going to frame my cousin randomly for a murder he didn't do. Who would do this? How could this ever be reasonable? That you would combine showing an undetectable gun and framing somebody else at the same time. And here's how further horrible your luck is if you're an innocent man. Because all of the things I've talked about would have to have already happened to you, right? But then we'd have to find out from Alexis Fertney and from Desiree Flores, from two different sources, that you are mad at Kaylie on the very day that she's murdered. You guys have been broken up for 3 months, 2.5 months. Now we know you're mad at her and expressing that to multiple people on the very same day she's murdered, right around noon. Unlucky that this person randomly murdered, you didn't do it, would have that going on. And you'd have Alexis Fertney saying that she dropped you at Ezra's, which means we can put you at an apartment that is directly across 104 from Kaylie's subdivision. And here's how unlucky you are. When you were dropped there, sometime around 1:30 or so, when you're dropped there, you're wearing a gray hoodie, and we know this from the Steins video too, but we also, and from Alexis Fertney house video, but we also know it from Ezra Stargel and from Alexis Fertney. So we have 4 sources knowing you're dressed in a gray hoodie, blue jeans, white shoes, and you have a black backpack. Okay? So on a random day, those are the 4 things we know about you, right? Well, here's a horrible, horrible circumstance if you're innocent and falsely accused, because you leave Ezra's right around 2 o'clock, unless Ezra is framing or lying about you. That's what he says, right around 2. And Ezra says he sees you leave on a bike. In fact, he identifies that bike. And here's how unlucky you are. That bike is a bike that Melinda Bowens says you took from her house. So Ezra sees you leave on a bike, which we also can trace to you from Melinda Bowens. It's just at around 2 o'clock. You're on a bike, and then within just a few seconds, here's how unlucky you are. There is video from within the subdivision of an individual wearing a gray hoodie, blue jeans, white shoes, with a black backpack, with a black bike, which the detective has said to you looks to him in close comparison as the same bike on the video. And that bike is headed towards the park. And if you keep going, of course, your route would take you to Kaylie Juga's house as well. So horribly bad luck for you that the only bicyclist through this area is wearing identical outfits down to the backpack and shoes that you are, and riding a bike, which a person like the detective and the other witnesses says is a match to what you left on from Ezra's just minutes or seconds earlier. So that's just right around 2, just after 2. We know that Kaylie and her mom get back at 2:20. And we know that affords you, and this is unlucky if you are a person who is falsely accused here, that time between just after 2 and the time of the entry into the garage, which is about 2:56, gives plenty of time to change, plenty of time to make sure that no one else is home, to wait for the mom and Kaylie to get home. It gives you plenty of time to get up your courage and to get yourself ready to do what you're going to do. You do not make the 2:40 preset time that you set with Lexi to come and get you. You are not there for that. That's unlucky, right? Because if you were there at 2:40 as an innocent guy, we'd know you weren't the guy dressed all in black at 2:56. We would know that. But you blew Lexi off at that time. Okay? And then later, as she drives home, after the 3:02, after the murder, then there is this desperate communication, please come and get me in a hurry, hurry up, that happens after the fact. So then here's something unlucky. The person who approaches the house, it's not you because you're innocent, right? The person who approaches the house at 2:56 p.m., do you remember? He actually goes through the neighbor's grass and yard in an apparent effort to avoid the windows, which would be Kaylie's room and the mom's office, and the video cameras. Okay? Which appear not to have been working. You wouldn't know it, right? So the idea is, I am hugging an area where I'm not going to be seen, and this person who does the murder is actually willing to walk through someone's yard and grass and jump their fence. Now let's say that I don't know this house, I don't know what those windows do, I'm not familiar with the fact that they probably have cameras in certain spots. Let's say I haven't scoped this place out. Would I risk walking through the neighbor's yard, in their grass, and jumping a fence out in the open? I submit to you, here's how unlucky the defendant is, no one would ever do that. If you were thinking, hey, I want to rob somebody in there, I want to burglarize, I have some other motive other than domestic violence, there's no way you would take the chance that somebody would see you walking through a yard, that neighbor could be home. There could be 100 reasons why you bring attention to yourself by doing that. The only reason you walk through the grass in that yard next door and jump the fence of the yard next door is because you're so conscious of how the Juga house is set up that that is your priority, to avoid somebody in the Juga house seeing you first or being on any kind of film that the Juga house would have. And again, why is that so unlucky? Because the defendant is a guy who would know that whole layout. A random person would not. And so it's really unlucky that everything about the approach to this house by the murderer is consistent with somebody who knows that house well. That's unlucky for you if you are innocent and falsely accused. You approach from the direction of the park, you flee back towards the park. The person who does this is wearing a black, sweatsuit, right? Black hoodie, black pants. And here's something that's a little unlucky for you. Desiree, who saw you 3 days ago, 2.5 days ago, when you spent the night there, said that's how you were dressed when she saw you last. When she saw you last, that was the outfit you were wearing. And here's something unlucky. We don't find that outfit. And we don't find the white shoes either. Well, let's see. Why, if you're an innocent guy, why would we find you in the clothes that you changed into after and before, and not the clothes you had on when you shed all that blood? Could it be that you're concerned we'll find blood on your white shoes, or you're concerned that there'll be specks of blood or matter on those black clothes, and so you got rid of those just like you thought you got rid of the gun? Really unlucky that clothes that Desiree says for sure he had, that white shoes that multiple people said he had, and that we even see in the video from earlier that day, really unlucky that those things are now mysteriously gone when we take him into custody on the 10th. Those things are all disappeared. Gee, that must be a horrible and unlucky coincidence for an innocent man falsely accused, that the clothes that a murder was done in are the only clothes missing. And the rest of the clothes we've seen him in, we have found. Unlucky if you are falsely accused. So the bike's identical. The clothes that you come to and from after changing in the park appear to be identical to your clothes. And all of those things are just horrible luck for a guy who has motive, a guy who has a gun, a guy who has the same type of gun, a guy who said he wanted to kill her and has all the motive, et cetera, everything else I've talked about. So here's another unlucky piece. Alexi Furtney says, after I pick him up, he's in a hurry to get out of Ezra's area there, and he is crying. And by the way, the shoes that I noticed were white before and were clean, now it's been, maybe an hour and a half or so, 2 hours since she's seen him. Now those shoes are muddy. And you heard the detective say that the park, etc., was muddy on that particular day. So somehow he's gotten his shoes muddy at the same time that this incident has occurred, though he's innocent and he's falsely accused. And here's an unlucky part. Alexi Furtney says, you're crying when you're in the vehicle with her, you're not yourself, it causes her to cry, and you tell her a story of a group of girls killing Kaylie. And here's unlucky for you, we know from the video that that's just not it. That's just not true. That is deception from you. So, it's unlucky that Dontrell Seymour ultimately tells us that while he is providing you transportation to Racine, you tell him, I did something, she gone. That's unlucky. that you either said that and the explanation that's logical is that you killed Kaylie Juga, or that for some reason he is framing you today. And here's what's really, really crazy unlucky. Desiree Flores Wyrock, not related to you, not one of your cousins, not one of your framing you cousins. Desiree Flores Wyrock, who is friendly enough to you, she'll let you stay at her house and will listen to you when you say things like, I'd like to kill my ex-girlfriend. She reports on May 6th that you asked her to help kill Kaylie and you said you had a gun. She reports, and we showed evidence that on May 7th at 6:54 p.m., you sent her a text, and we know it's him because it's consistent with what he told her the night before. Do that hit with me 100%. And then just hours before the murder, Desiree Flores Wyrock confirms, and we have evidence that a text or that communication was made at 11:52 a.m. saying, I'm so mad, you need to do that to her. So if you are innocent and you're falsely accused, why is this random person, Desiree Flores Wyrock, who I believe my co-counsel artfully said, if you're getting some kind of deal, how come you keep getting charged again and again and again with new charges, right? So it's the worst, you know, there is no evidence there's any deal. In fact, there appears to be the contrary. And she, in custody, came here and told you this person, who she identified, wanted her 3 separate times, the 6th, the 7th, and the day of the murder, the 9th of May, to help kill Kaylie Juga. If you're innocent and falsely accused, then you are also a person who is also trying to have her killed that day, and yet you are not responsible for her death. That's how unlucky you would have to be. And then a couple weeks before, you get Kyle Bowen to give you some ammunition for this gun that looks the same. And you're given the wrong bullets. Okay, it's .380 ammunition, 9mm pistol. And the ammunition that Kyle Bowen gives you has a very particular stamp on it, right? It's a particular a brand, and so it has its own stamp. Here's how unlucky you are. You got some of that ammunition from Kyle Bowen, and it's wrong for the gun, so that's weird, okay, that coincidence is true, because the murder is, again, also a crime that occurs where someone is using a 9mm, we know because there's a murder weapon, and they're using .380 ammunition. So the mismatched ammunition is the same circumstance you yourself have in the gun you have, even though you didn't do this, okay? That's how crazy it would have to be for this to be an innocent man. But remember, though, too, even more particularly, here's how your bad luck would be. The stamp on that ammunition from the Bowen household is the same as the bullet that's found, apparently dropped on the sidewalk by the park, where logically you would hide your bike and you would change your clothes, okay? So a person engaging the gun or doing something with the gun might drop one of those bullets, and again, it's that same type of ammunition. And in Kaylie's room is another one of those spent casings with that same Kyle Bowen's brand ammunition. I mean, what are the chances? What are the chances that you did not do this and that it's reasonable that these things would occur? Okay, now, I haven't even gotten to the most powerful piece of evidence in this case, guys. I haven't even gotten to the part that simply could not happen in any conceivable way consistent with the defendant's innocence. Because Anshanice Andrews is done with her interview. She is literally being escorted out of the interview. And a detective says to her, what if your daughter was in the situation Kyle was in? What if you were Juga family? And she stops the detective and says, I have more to tell you. This is the defendant's cousin, who in that moment of conscience, right, that moment, thinking about the Juga family and the loss, said, I have more I can tell you. He confessed to me. And then, as you've heard us a couple times say, but I'm going to cover one more time, there are a number of things Ann Shanice knows about this case, that many of which the police do not even know yet. Okay? Here's what that would mean. If Ann Shanice is able, in the very early morning hours on May 10th, to provide the information, the defendant, my cousin, confessed to this crime, with these details, then she has superhuman psychic ability. Okay? She can predict the circumstances of a murder before they are known to the general public, before they are even known to the police. And that superpower that she possesses, for some reason, if this is an innocent man, she uses that superpower on this day to try to frame her cousin for a murder. A person who no one's identified that she had anything against. That is what you would have to believe. Because Ann Shanice Andrews says that the defendant told her that, that Kaylie, the victim, was mad at Lexi, the place he was staying, on that morning. Well, how would they know that? I mean, no one had talked to Alexis Fertney fully yet. The law enforcement would not know that. Certainly that was not out there in any fashion in social media that she would have any access to. And Shanice said that the defendant, her cousin, said he was dropped by a friend who was driving him around. Well, how would she possibly know that? How would she possibly know that that's how, the mode of transportation? And Shanice Andrews said he biked into a park. No one knew that yet. No one had reviewed this video at the time Ann Shanice was being talked to. So there's no evidence in this record that anyone knew that except the defendant at the time of the incident, at the time Ann Shanice shared that information. She said, he told me he went into a park and he changed into dark clothes and he had white shoes. Well, that's exactly right. That's exactly what we know after we look and compare the videos. And how, under any circumstances, would she know that? The law enforcement did not have any idea of that yet. She predicts actual true facts before the police have any idea. And Shanice said that he jumped the fence. And again, we know that from the video, but that video had not been reviewed or in any way looked at, and certainly wasn't available on social media at the time Ann Shanice Andrews gave that detail. She indicated that he said Kaylie was playing music in her room. And no one knew that until Stephanie Juga was spoken to at the hospital after that. There's no way that anyone would know a detail like Kaylie was listening to music in her room, which Stephanie confirms at that moment. How would you know that detail without psychic abilities or having heard it from the defendant? He said that her mom was in the other room, that he shot her mom twice. That wasn't publicly known. No one knew how many times she'd been shot. How would that be something Ann Shanice Andrews would know unless the defendant told her? How could she get that right? And then she was shot when the mom opened the door and then she tried to close it. Well, that's exactly what Stephanie tells us. But Stephanie had not even been able to go through that version with us because she was still in the hospital under critical care, and there was no way the detectives involved with Ann Shanice knew those details yet. She said the defendant told her he shot Kaylie in the face and something about that there was a black on her face. And that is the one that sent chills through me. Because you heard Stephanie say that, you heard that first officer, Deputy Eckert, say there was black mark on her face. How would Ann Shanice Andrews know that? Unless the defendant had said it as an observation himself. He texted a friend to pick him up. That's exactly what happened. How was that available to Aunt Shanice at that point? And then here's the other one that sent the chill through me. He told a mom of a friend, "Don't tell the police I was there." Okay, again, that's not the kind of detail anyone had. Easily accessible at that point. That's not something that was in social media. It's not in writings about the case. But when you heard from Alicia Stargell, okay, the mom of a friend, she says, "He told me, if anyone comes, don't tell him I was here." So again, how would Aunt Shanice know that? So I'm almost done. All of those things from Aunt Shanice Andrews could not be known, could not be accurate and right. Even the police didn't know them, many of them, at the time they first spoke to her, unless the defendant had told her, that those had occurred. And so for her to make those things up and be right and be framing him is beyond any reasonable belief. It is not a reasonable basis for doubt. Now, the last piece I want to talk about in terms of that is this interview with Detective Dietz. So, the state put that in. We said, here's what he told a guy who he knew from coaching, because Detective Dietz works for KPD, but he also, coaches at Bradford, so he had some interaction and relationship with the defendant already. And what happened in that interview, from the state's perspective, also is something you should consider, and goes to this idea of how, if this was an innocent man, these things just wouldn't happen. Okay? All of these things would not happen to an innocent man. So why do I say that? Because what the defendant offered to Detective Dietz was this. Essentially, I did not kill Kaylie Juga. Instead, here's what I did. I was over at Lexi's. I got up around noon. I had some pancakes that she brought me. I walked from there to my mom's house. I got to my mom's house. My mom had a baby over. My mom and I interacted. And then I decided to go take a nap. And so I napped till sometime 2:45, 3, at which point I began to walk some paths at Parkside. And that's my explanation for my whereabouts. I was by myself walking the paths at Parkside. Let's think about that moment. If you are an innocent man falsely accused, well, here's your moment. You know Kaylie Juga is dead. You know you're not being talked to at random. So if you are an innocent man, what you would do is you would say absolute truths. Because this is that moment, right? This is the moment for absolute truths, if you're an innocent man falsely accused. If you're guilty, though, you're going to lie. Okay? You can't tell the truth, so you're going to lie. And you're going to tell lies and hope that they can't be proven. Okay? And here's what you know. You know that what he chose to do was tell lies. You have the video, you saw a snapshot at Stein's. You have the testimony of both of the Stargells. They're making this up. The Stargells are lying about what happened at their house on 2 parts of that early afternoon. When he says he was at his mother's house or at Parkside, he was at the Stargells' house. Lexi Fertney, who says I gave him rides during the times he says that she wasn't with him and that he was at his mother's house. Okay? So all of those individuals, and then you have Cole Ballard, right, who says I spoke to him on the phone at 3:20 during the time that, according to what he told Detective Dietz, he'd be at Parkside by himself on some park path or on a bench. And Cole Ballard says, I spoke to the defendant by phone. I know him. He's a friend of mine. I know his voice. And he wanted me to come and pick him up at Aurora, which is right by Kaylie's house, right? So we know from Cole Ballard, who otherwise, you know, what, is he gonna frame people? Is Cole Ballard a part of some huge frame up here? That what he chose to tell Detective Deeds is a pack of complete and utter lies. And again, if you are an innocent man and falsely accused, it is horrifically bad luck that you chose that moment to lie your rear off about where you were. Really bad luck. Then I just want to talk for a split second about tampering with the jury the last time, because again, that goes to consciousness of guilt. Okay, an innocent person does not feel that they need to again try to manipulate every friend and relative they can think of. You know, possibly getting these people in trouble, right? Telling them, hey, get in touch with this person. I can't say much. They're recording the calls. You know, don't make me talk about it. But, you know, do you remember what I said? Do this, you know, so forth. All of this sort of manipulative direction of those people still trying to stick around and stick by him is what you do if you are guilty and you simply are doing everything you can think of to avoid responsibility. Ladies and gentlemen, when you think about all those things together, you will conclude there's no way all that stuff could happen to a person who is innocent and falsely accused. The only reasonable explanation is the defendant is guilty of the offenses we have considered here today. The defendant killed Kaylie Juga. He entered that house with a gun. He tried to kill Stephanie Juga. He took away so many things that we have grieved over in this room over the last several days. He stole them away. He stole them away because of his absolute need to be in control of situations. Your verdict today will take that control back and will tell this defendant, it is about the rule of law. He doesn't get the control. You, the jury, do. And so I ask you to find him guilty and hold him responsible for those heinous crimes that he has done.